I will start now. Welcome to our forest restoration talks series. My name is Gesche Schifferdecker. I'm a comms manager at EFI and I'm your moderator today. And today we have a collaboration forest restoration talk. We do this together with Superb, of course, also the Integrate Network, TRANSFORMIT, the FoRISK facility, and of course EFI. And today we have a very timely topic. We will talk about the recent storms in Ireland, and we will discuss what can be done after the storm. So pathways to forest recovery and restoration in Ireland. And then in the panel later, we will also discuss about other disturbances and how we can make our forest more resilient. But before we do that, I would like to introduce you to the housekeeping as always. The webinar is being recorded and the recording will be available to watch on the EFI YouTube account afterwards in a couple of days. So in case you think this is relevant to some of your colleagues or friends, then you can find it on the EFI YouTube account early next week. If you have questions to the panelists, please use the dedicated Q&A box and we will pick the questions up in the panel. Since we have a big panel today, we will most likely not promote selected participants to speakers, but we will make sure to catch up on your questions in the Q&A. And if you want to learn more about the work that we do, please follow us on LinkedIn. And this, of course, also relates to the other projects that I mentioned in the beginning, FoRISK and TRANSFORMIT. Now I would like to, because as said, this is a collaboration also with the Integrate Network. So I would like to ask my colleague, Jonathan Spassi, from who is the current Integrate chair, to speak some introductory words about what Integrate is doing and kind of framing it overall. And then we will continue with the keynotes presentation. Jonathan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Gesche, and a warm welcome to all our viewers today. As you mentioned, I am jointly with Dermot Dunphy of the Department of Agriculture, the chair for this year of the Integrate Network. And I first got involved with the Integrate Network in 2019 when I was developing close to nature training in Ireland as part of my work in Teagasc. And I met at the time a very dynamic team of researchers, policymakers, educators, and certainly has been a very fertile ground over the years for new projects and European collaborations. So today is for me a privilege, an honor and a pleasure to serve as the network's chair. The Integrate Network is an alliance of representatives of different European countries and essentially promotes the integration of high level of biodiversity into forest management for resilience and multifunctionality, and it aims to serve as a discussion and facilitation space between research, practice, and policy in Europe. If we look across Europe today, unfortunately, we find our forests under unprecedented pressure. We see the effects of climate change are no longer distance projections. We see droughts, wildfire, windstorms, most recently in Ireland, pest outbreaks, which are all reshaping our forest landscapes and are impacting on our ecosystems, but also on our communities and economies. At the same time, forests remain central to our collective effort to mitigate and adapt to climate change. They serve as carbon sinks, water regulators, biodiversity and cultural reservoirs. They're a source of timbers for our home and a source of inspiration and well-being for our communities. And this is precisely why the Integrate Network exists, to help to find balanced, evidence-based approaches towards forest management solutions that integrate biodiversity, resilience, and multifunctionality at the forest level, but also the landscape, country, and European level. So Ireland took the chair of the network this year, following from Austria's excellent work in 2024, where we started to focus on private forest owners' experience. So this focus on private forest owners continues this year in Ireland, and if anything, it intensifies further. And we're currently planning a European workshop in Dublin in October, where we bring together a group of private forest owners, researchers, educators, practitioners, and policymakers. So on this note, I am delighted and pleased to have with us Noel Kelly. Welcome, Noel.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Noel is a local forest owner here in Clare, where we both live, and one that I would certainly describe as a pioneer and well ahead of his time, as I think you and Sharon, your wife, were planning for integrated management and multifunctionality at a time a few decades ago when very few people were even talking about it. So Noel and I met in recent weeks and days as Noel's forest was substantially impacted by the recent storm, and we put together a few slides to document Noel and Sharon forest development first, the impact on storm Ewan on the forest and on future management. And then we conclude leading with some considerations and questions to our expert panel discussion. So I might go ahead and share the screen.
Yes, please do so. Wonderful. Works perfect.
Okay. So I hope you can see the first slide okay?
Yes, we can. You can start now.
Okay, so after the storm, pathway to forest recovery and restoration. So the picture here is a picture that I took when visiting Noel's forest after the storm a few weeks ago, and I think it well illustrates the impact of the storm on the forest, and one that you know, unfortunately, are too familiar with. So in the next 20 minutes, as I said, we will present together, mostly Noel, the development of the forest in the last 25 years, the impact of the storm, which happened in a few hours, really, and the impact also on future management and the thinking around forest management. So before I hand over to Noel, just a little bit of context for our viewers. I think to understand Irish forestry, it's important to take an historical perspective. Ireland is unique, probably, or one of the few countries in Europe that experienced near total deforestation in recent times. So over the last few centuries, we have experienced a progressive deforestation, which left the country with little more than 1% forest cover at the beginning of the 1900s. However, since then, we have seen a very fast reforestation effort, primarily driven by state-funded afforestation programs. And today, in a relatively short space of time, we reached 11% forest cover. Now, the initial plantings were focused on production and conifer species, but in recent years, we've seen a rapid trend to diversification of objectives and species, driven both by policy, but also importantly, driven by forest owners themselves. And I think Noel and his wife Sharon, as I mentioned, certainly represent such progressive forest owners looking to integrate multiple objectives, high biodiversity for resilience and legacy. So I might hand over to you, Noel, from here, just to tell us the story of your forest. So I might just, there's a few bits of information on the slides. I might just start asking you, could you tell us first why did you and your wife decided to plant, and why you planted the way you did?
Okay, thank you, Jonathan, and hello to everyone. Seamus Heaney, the famous Irish poet, once wrote, "No bit of the natural world is more valuable or more vulnerable than the tree bit. Nothing is more like ourselves, standing upright, caught between heaven and earth, frail at the extremities, yet strong at the central trunk. And nothing is closer to us at the beginning and at the end, providing the timber boles that frame both the cradle and the coffin." When I read this a number of years ago, it resonated with me in some way. It verbalized a love and respect for trees that I have always had. I grew up on a dairy and cattle farm, and yet trees were a constant in our lives. Ash and whitethorn were the main species in the hedgerow, which were the boundaries of our fields. Hazel provided stakes for fencing. Ash was the firewood that heated our house and used for cooking. Apple trees in the orchard. As children, our goalposts when we played games were 2 trees in the garden. Right beside our house is a Chilean pine, a monkey puzzle tree that my grandfather planted over 100 years ago. And Sharon keeps giving out about. She thinks he's going to fall any day now. And even at the end of the year, we brought sprigs of holly with red berries into the house to decorate the house for Christmas. So when I inherited a farm then from my uncle, forestry seemed to be a kind of a natural choice. I started going to forestry demonstrations and events, informing myself about the possibility of establishing our own plantation. I was very fortunate to meet some fantastic people along the way who encouraged and supported me to take a broader view of forestry other than merely growing timber. I got tremendous support from the Forest Service and from the Tagus Farm Advisory Service. And they opened my eyes to how a diverse species plantation could fit into the landscape and the rolling hills of the farm, and how there could be a base plate for a richer variety of flora and fauna, let's put it that way. The generous supporting of the Forest Service made the project not only kind of possible, but attractive. And carbon sequestration was being discussed at the time, and I was hopeful that carbon credits would provide an income stream by waiting for the slower species to reach maturity. So, armed with a lot of enthusiasm and probably with as much naivety, the wood was planted in 2001. The overall initial planting was 70% conifers and 30% broadleaves. Sitka spruce and hybrid larch are the main conifers, with lesser plots of Scots pine, Norway spruce, Douglas fir, western red cedar. And in the broadleaves then we have alder and ash would be the main or most plentiful ones, and oak and pockets of beech and sycamore.
So you can clearly see from the slide as well the extent of the diversity of species, which is probably not typical for the time. No, it would be fair. You would probably
it was unusual.
Took a more enthusiastic approach to tree planting, which is great. And you also engage with management quite earlier on. You developed a road and access road for management earlier on. Could you tell us a bit more about that experience as well?
When I used to be visiting other forest sites before we planted, it was the one thing that always struck me was everyone planted the ground and no one thought about access. It was only when they wanted to do a thinning or a harvesting intervention that they put a corridor through the wood and developed the road. And I just thought with the size of our site that a road was essential. I suppose it was part of my livestock farming as well, and being able to move cattle from one end of the farm. So we were very fortunate in as well. We had a stone quarry on the site. So we had our own stone and gravel, and we made about best part of 3 kilometers of roads and trails linking the whole site together. And when we came to planting, then we put clusters of other species besides the main ones along the side of the road, like sweet chestnut and hornbeam and copper beech, rowan or mountain ash, walnuts, planes, you name it, they're all represented there. And just the thinking of was, if someone was going through a walk through the woods, that every 20 meters there was going to be different trees beside them. It just made the walk just more interesting. And as I say, sure, we were like children let loose with a paint box, basically, on the forest.
Well, I can testify, having been in Knowles and Sharon Forest many times, it's a very pleasant place to be. On the commercial side, on the timber production side, could you categorize, say, what percentage did you allocate for that? In total, you planted 60 hectares, which is well above average for forest plantations.
Yeah, 60 hectares in total. About a quarter of the area, slightly less than a quarter, would be Sitka spruce. Another quarter, 25%, hybrid larch, 5 or 6% Douglas. Just small amounts, but the two main ones between them are hybrid larch and.
So there would have been a main timber species you planted for.
Yeah.
Okay. And I know in terms of management, again, in 2020, you decided to apply for a continuous cover forestry woodland improvement scheme and for forestry to transform some of the forest towards permanent productive forest. Would I just briefly ask you, why did you decide this approach, and are you planning to expand it, or how is it working?
Well, it was a funny thing about the forest. The age we were when we were planted, like I was in early 40s, and there was always this notion of what would become of it after I passed on. So I always thought that if we could have it established as a continuous cover management system, that you could, the family, whoever came after me, could kind of employ someone, and that could be just going on and to be always there as a kind of a legacy to the children. I don't know whether it worked or not, but that was kind of the theory. And then at the time, there was a pilot scheme introduced by the Forest Service. So we said we'd give it a go anyway, and we have done the first intervention on it. We said it was the first thinning done on the different plots. It was a 10 acre, I think.
10 hectares. So
10 hectares.
I think you can see the area there was what initial transformation is starting in 2020.
And in that 10 hectares, then there are plots of Sitka spruce, hybrid larch, Douglas, western red cedar, and Norway spruce. All the different main conifers are included in that. So
it's work in progress for now.
Oh yeah, like a lot of things in my life, unfinished business maybe rather than work in progress. But there you go.
Well then, enter Storm Ewan on 24th of January. This is just a map that's trying to capture the impact on the forest. Can you talk us through your experience at the time and maybe comment on the map as it's up there?
About the storm first. It was the strongest storm ever recorded in Ireland. As Irish people, we have grown up always hearing about the night of the big wind, January 1839. A fantastic storm. Thousands of houses got burned because they had thatch roofs, and sparks from the fire got on the roofs, and the whole lot went. Took down fantastic amounts of firewood and frightened the natural life out of the population. They thought it was some otherworldly event. You see, no forewarning, no nothing, just this descended on them. But there was no way of recording wind speeds in those days. So Storm Eowyn is the strongest storm ever actually recorded. Sustained wind speeds were 110 kilometers, which is hurricane force. And at home, after it abated and we could put our heads out again, we checked the farmyard at home and survived unscathed pretty much. There were trees down on the local public roads, so we did our bit and helped to clear the roads so traffic could move. And then we went down to see our forest. And something I'll always remember, at the gate of our forest, just inside the gate, there's a hill. And we have a little grove of oak trees on that, and at the back of that is a block of Sitka spruce. And the oaks always look dark because you have this dark wall behind it. But that afternoon we approached and the oak forest was bright with daylight shining through because the whole block of Sitka was just totally flattened. And we went furthering along then, and there was a plot of Sitka spruce on the left-hand side, and there was a couple of minor casualties, but nothing major. But on the right-hand side, there was another area of fairly serious storm damage, and a lot of trees falling and leaning on one another. And then we got further into the wood, and what was our pride and joy, there was a block of Sitka spruce. Jonathan had done a survey in the wood in 2018, and this particular block was surveyed at 34 plus yield class, so it was grown fantastically well. And when we got as far as it, there was the outside shell was still standing with light appearing through, and the whole inside of it was just totally flattened as well. And it was one of those Houston, we have a problem moments, and we just turned the Jeep and drove home in disgust. And the next day we braced ourselves again, and we went down to do a further examination on the forest. And there was another plot as well that was severely damaged, another plot of Sitka spruce. So basically, Sitka spruce was the one species that really suffered. There were bits and pieces of the other species, but nothing that should keep you up at night worrying. The next week then I reached out to Jonathan just to let him know about the damage in our place, because I knew that the authorities would be trying to get an overall picture of the devastation across the country. And he said that as soon as they got organised, that Taugust or Forest Service would be running information events to let us know how to deal with the aftermath of the storm. And I attended one of those events in County Galway. And there I learned that almost 10 million cubic meters of timber had been knocked over in Ireland. That's 2.5 times the total annual timber harvest. And they gave us an outline of the regulations then about harvesting fallen timber. And they said we'd have to get a felling license, but that the storm-related applications would be expedited as much as they could. And then further on in the site, we were shown examples of the different grades of logs. And unhappily for us attendees, we were told that timber prices had already started to fall due to the usual supply and demand dynamics.
Okay, so obviously quite traumatic to the forest and to yourselves. So you were saying you have approximately, in terms of spruce and larch area, is it 17 hectares? So
we'd have about 14
hectares, yeah.
That kind of hectares of spruce. There's 4 or 5 of those definitely flattened, and another 4 or 5 then of hectares destabilized, leaning. And then I suppose when a harvester gets in, then you'll probably find that there's other ones that maybe the root plate has started to come free from the ground. The tree might still be vertical, but you'd see where the wind had kind of moved the root place. So all those presumably would have to be taken out in a harvest situation.
So it is possible that both the wind-blown areas and the destabilized area would have to be removed.
I expect the will, sure. There's no point
which
thinking
with neighbouring trees as well, unstable, might reduce your production forest area by half or more.
Oh, I'd say more than half
if
we consider that Sitka is the main production species. Yeah.
So there'll be a substantial cost to that.
There will.
Okay, so there's a lot of considerations that we'll touch on in the last slide, but the immediate focus, I think, for you, since you have a substantial windblown timber on the ground, is to get it harvested. I would say probably in the next 6 months before the timber will start to devalue. So could you give us a picture then, where are you now, Noel, in relation to recovering the windblown timber?
Well, we've applied for a felling license, and I expecting that could be in the next couple of weeks. In fairness, the department are doing everything they can to get them issued to the growers as fast as they can. And when I have a license in my hand, then I can reach out to timber buyers or their agents about the sale of timber. And when I get some agreement there, I look to find a harvesting contractor. Now, they're probably up to their eyes, but eventually we will find one. And when I get a harvesting contractor on site, then again, what you're saying there, the question arises, how much do we take out? Obviously, the fallen trees and the ones that are leaning, and probably the ones around as well, that are probably destabilized. An issue I have is the ones all around the kind of shell of the plots that have stayed standing. They're obviously wind-fearing, but if I leave them, what becomes of the younger trees that lie plant inside them? They'll grow on the shelter of the outside ones, but late down the year, when we remove some of the outside shell, does that mean what's inside it will be kind of less resilient because they have grown in the shelter of the bigger trees? These are things I'd like to find out about the experience, maybe from other countries, how they dealt with the replanting of windthrown sites.
And have you already thought about what are you going to replant with? Or
Well, sure. We have a whole range of biodiverse conifers in the place. So spruce is the one spruce is the number one commercial species in Ireland. It grows very well in Ireland. It likes our soil types. It likes our climate. Tolerates a whole range of fertility levels. Unfortunately for me, it's the one that fared the worst in the storm. And then questions arise, is it something about the species? Could I have something done differently all along with management? Was it too late when I did the first thinning? Or maybe move away from Sitka spruce? Would Norway be a better? Would that be more wind-fearing? Or would I put in Sitka spruce, maybe a lesser percentage, which with blocks of other wind-fearing species in between? I'd be fascinated to hear the experience of people from other countries who have experienced this before. You know that old, it's Albert Einstein, isn't he credited with that great saying that the definition of madness is to repeat the same thing and expect a different result? So we'll obviously have to tweak it some way, but it'd be interesting to know what the panel will think about that.
yeah, that's a fair amount of questions there for the panel already. We're getting to our final slide, really, slightly over time, not too bad. So these are just a few considerations and points that I jotted down during our conversation with Noel and Sharon in recent weeks. Things that arose from looking back and looking forward. So, and I'm sure many of those questions will form part of the panel discussion. Do you want to elaborate a little bit more on any of those, Noel, before we hand back to Geshe and the panel?
The first thing I'd like to say is I'd love to get a conversation going about one of the things that I have a real bee in my bonnet about. We all talk about sustainable forest management, but surely that also should apply to the economic sustainability of the grower. And climate experts predict that very severe storms will become more frequent into the future. Now, any well-managed business will avail of insurance cover to protect its assets. And we did what we could. We had full storm cover on the plantation for 20 years until it became no longer available. And I'm wondering, can there be some European or state-sponsored insurance scheme that will cover growers and cover our investment in forestry? It doesn't sit easy with me going to the state with cap in hand looking for a bailout in the time of crisis. Nor I think is it fair on the state that they have to come up with a large sum of money if they're going to support the growers. So maybe a national or international insurance scheme for forestry might be something to be explored at least. Now that I have that got off my chest, there are other aspects of this as well. Years ago, when we were looking at the options of planting, our initial thought would have been along the lines of 75% Sitka spruce and 25% ash. And here we are in 2025. The ash that we had into place is now gone. I finished cutting the last of that in there early April because of the ash dieback disease. So that's totally gone. My Sitka spruce is 60–65% flattened. So wasn't he a wise Forest Service inspector who told me to plant diverse conifers? At least today I have 45 hectares of forestry still standing and intact. And it's just funny how things work out, you know.
Yeah, well, it brings home the value of using diverse species.
Yeah.
Obviously, matching species, they're compatible, and matching species to markets.
Yes.
As well is the big question, but I'm sure we can hand over that discussion for the panel as well. I think we covered enough. I might hand over back to you, Geshe, if that's okay, for the panel discussion.
Thank you very much, Noel, and thank you very much, Jonathan. Yeah, it was a very interesting and also, of course, sad story to see that so much of your forest has been damaged, and I also appreciate that you want to make things different or want to be better prepared for the future. So we will definitely have some insights from experts in the panel on those questions. I also noted down all your questions. I hope we can address as many of them as possible in the panel. Speaking of the panel, I would like to introduce my panelists now, and I will start with Caroline Stiel. She is a colleague working with us in Superb, and she leads the team Silviculture and its subdepartment Silviculture, Forest Ecology, Climate Adaptation at the Center of Forest and Wood Industry of the State Forest Service North Rhine-Westphalia in Germany. She is involved with our Superb demo area there, and this demo area has suffered from severe storm damages and then drought and then bark beetle. She will talk more about that later. Our second panelist is Jo O'Hara. She's a former UK Forestry Commissioner and a professional chartered forester. She is currently the director of Future Arc Ltd, which provides guidance on strategic forest questions. And she is a non-executive board member of Forestry and Land Scotland. Furthermore, she's leading the upscaling work package in Superb, so she knows a lot about forest strategies and also adaptation methods and forest restoration, of course. Then on the panel is Christoph Orazio. He's an experienced researcher, and he's also the CEO / director of the European Institute of Planted Forests in Aquitaine in France. He brings in knowledge and expertise on forest risk management and climate change adaptation, and he is hosting both a demonstration area in the Superb project and a living lab in TRANSFORMIT. So he's involved also in both of those projects that are hosts today. And then finally, Fergus Moore. He is the head of the Forest Sector Development Division at the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine in the Irish Ministry. He leads a multidisciplinary team working on the development of the forest sector in general, also national forest inventory, forest genetic resources, and the contribution of forests to climate change mitigation adaptation. So the perfect expert for today. And my first question also goes to Fergus to kind of look at what Noel presented from the policy perspective. Next slide, please. What are, from your perspective, the current preliminary findings on the storm damage in the Irish forests, and also the findings across different forest types and regions? Because yeah, Noel has elaborated on the amount of Sitka spruce that has been damaged. Is this also something that you can say on the overall at scale, or are there different findings based on your current knowledge?
Thank you, Keisha, and good afternoon to everybody on the panel and also to our viewers online. And thanks to Noel as well and Jonathan for giving us that description of what happened to obviously Noel's forest at a local level, which obviously was quite devastating for Noel. And actually as well, it's been quite a devastating storm. On the 24th of January 2025, as Noel said, we had large gusts of winds over 184 kilometers per hour. Again, as Noel mentioned, the largest recorded storm in Irish history. We had over 760,000 homes without power during the course of a number of weeks when the storm hit. And again, with a 2.5 years annual cut of timber on the ground in one night. So you're looking at about 10 to 12 million cubic meters of timber on the ground. And again, when you look at the area and extent of the damage that happened, it's about 26,000 hectares in total. And again, using expertise within the department and in Coillte from previous storms regarding carrying out estimates, we basically use our National Forest Inventory, which is a really, I suppose, a good point to make is that National Forest Inventories are very important right across member states for a whole range of different reasons. But we're able to quite quickly establish that we had about 26,000 forests hectares damaged by the storm. And when we looked at what type of forests were impacted, about 80% of that area was Sitka spruce, as Noel has outlined regarding his own particular plantation. And again, about 3/4 of the area was actually less than 35 years of age. So again, those forests are very productive, as Noel has mentioned. They grow very tall, so when they grow very tall, they're more vulnerable to windstorms and wind damage. And about 50% of the area had been thinned at least once. So again, we have that dynamic of management intensity and, you know, when do you thin, the time you're thinning. So that's obviously quite important. When we looked at the soil types in general from a National Forest Inventory, about 2/3 of the area were on wet mineral soils, and about a further 20% were on peatlands. And the average height of the spruce trees that blew down were in the region of about 18 meters. And that's some general high-level information we were able to glean from our National Forest Inventory. And again, using, I suppose, the Copernicus satellite system, again, using Sentinel-2 data, we were able to look at before and after images of the storm before and after it hit. And again, we use imagery such as SkySat as well, with resolutions between 0.5 meters, and the Sentinel had resolutions of 10 meters. So again, quite quickly, yeah, we established that we have a serious issue to deal with. So that's really where we are at the moment, a large significant event that's hit Ireland. And again, as Noel mentioned, you know, the reforestation piece, you know, like what do we do? Do we do things differently? Or at the landscape level, I think it's important to point out that not all our forests blew down. The storm did track up through Ireland, and you can see there from the picture on the screen. It mainly impacted on the left-hand side, County Clare, where Noel is from. And then it went up to the north west of Ireland. So it was a very localized storm, but quite devastating in the impacts that it had. But even in the photograph you see there on the screen, not all the forests blew down. So there is a diversity of age-class structures in our landscape, even with our plantation forests. And it's quite important to make that point that, you know, just because you have plantation forests, they're all susceptible to wind throw. There's a diversity of age-class structures there. So the fact we're planting every single year a certain level of afforestation over the last 30 or 40 years, we do have quite a resilient landscape in certain parts with lots of different age classes. So, you know, not all forests did blow down, but a lot of forests did blow down, and we have to look at how we manage those and the reforestation afterwards. So again, like Noel is mentioning, I'd really be interested to hear some of the expertise from the panel here as well regarding what's happened in different countries and maybe the certain learnings we can have here in Ireland.
Thank you very much, Fergus. I have one more question to you before we then ask Caroline, who has this experience and also some policy or like some kind of support from the policy side for the forest owners. So she will elaborate on that, on how to restore and recover the forest. What are your strategies from the governance perspective? How are you supporting forest owners affected by the storm?
That's a good question. I mean, certainly when the storm happened, our minister was very, very concerned, and he immediately set up a national windblow task force whereby we brought together, chaired by the minister, all the various stakeholders around the table. So we have forest owners, we ourselves in the department, we've the harvesting contractors, we've got people involved in the advisory services like that Jonathan works with. And again, they'll be meeting on a regular basis. At the moment, we're just finalising a draft, I suppose, storm action plan that looks at prioritising a number of key events that need to take place. But it's also important to point out that around that table that the minister chairs on a regular basis, there's an awful lot of good work being done by the industry themselves and the stakeholders. We have on Chagas on the advisory side, I've been holding webinars and talks in relation with forest owners explaining, I suppose, you know, the impacts of the storm. And again, we reached out to international expertise through the task force. We reached out to the Forest Risk Facility. And again, back in the ministerial conference on forests back before December, you know, Ireland was one of the first countries to, I suppose, to declare that we're very interested in supporting a Forest Risk Facility, because we could see I suppose, the benefits of sharing collaboration across member states. And then in January, when the storm hit, we reached out to the Forest Risk Facility to say, listen, we're probably one of your first projects to come and help us. And really, the Forest Risk Facility have been fantastic. We had an expert on wind, Christoph Hartbrot, came over to Ireland on 2 occasions. We held a workshop whereby we got all the stakeholders together to identify some of the bottlenecks associated with managing and removing a large quantity of timber from a particular landscape. And we also had Sylvia Abrascata as well from the Forest Risk Facility facilitating the event. Regarding, I suppose, financial, resources that we're looking at, our minister is quite keen to explore a reconstitution grant to provide financial assistance to forest owners in the replanting of their forests. And we're still, I suppose, working out regarding how much that will cost and how we would actually do it. But even under our existing forestry programme, we've got a climate reforestation resilience scheme, which looks at existing owners which are thinking of reforestation, to look at things like continuous cover forestry, to look at riparian forests that are beside rivers, in looking at improving the quality of those forests adjoining river systems. So we have some financial supports that are currently available. And also, you know, we're looking at, you know, the requirement as well, I suppose, to continue forest monitoring from a plant health perspective. We don't have bark beetle in Ireland, which is great at the moment. And certainly we're continuing to monitor that, because certainly with, I suppose, 12 cubic meters of timber on the ground, that's a significant pest risk. But we don't have our bark beetle. So in the next, I suppose, 2 growing seasons, the advice we're having is that if the forest windblown trees are still attached to the root, there's at least 2 years growing season whereby the timber is still sound. So that allows us to, hopefully over a period of the next 12, 18 months, carry out the harvesting. It's important to acknowledge as well, there's lots of, I suppose, industry grower organisations such as the Irish Forest Owners and others are looking at identifying markets to actually export timber, looking at different ways of, you know, removing timber in kind of a surge capacity, because we need additional harvests in the country. The industry themselves have brought in extra harvests from Europe. We've about 165 harvesters in the country. We have harvesting machines coming in over the next number of weeks, again facilitated by the industry. So it's important to point out that obviously government and ministry have an important role in helping and assisting our forest owners, but it's a collaborative effort for all stakeholders to get involved. And we're quite lucky in Ireland that we have very dedicated and really experienced foresters and growers, which are really keen on doing the best they possibly can to try and mobilise as much of this timber as possible. But certainly, there's some of the things we're looking at. The issues we may have is haulage. Haulage is a big blockage in our system. We have harvesters and we have timber, and we have obviously a capacity in the sawmills. The sawmills have also arranged to increase their capacity by about 30%, which is very important to try and increase that additional volume that's there. And also the haulage side, you know, there's no point in hauling timber to the roadside if you can't haul it to the mills. So again, that's another issue we have to try and really grapple with. And I know a lot of people in the industry, and again ourselves in the ministry, are working hard to try and see if there's any way we can facilitate and make that situation improve a lot more. But certainly, you know, the ministry is here to help forest owners. Obviously, it's very costly to restore forests. And it's very costly for forest owners to plant forests on their own land, you know. And again, what I would say is, you know, over the last number of years, you know, the hardest thing is planting a green field with a forest, you know. We've done that, and subsequent rotations, we're seeing an increase in diversity of those forests are replanted again. So there's opportunities to change, but Noel makes a really good point there about the economics, you know, about sustainable forest management. It's okay to say, well, listen, if we do X, Y, and Z, a forest will be more resilient, but if it doesn't have economic stability or economic sustainability, well, then it's not really worth doing that in every single case. So again, interested to hear some of the panel discussions on that later on. Thanks.
Thank you, Fergus. It's great to hear that you're covering so many areas with your measures, including also kind of providing the infrastructure, providing the guidance, also some financial support. You really try hard to kind of work on all the levels. And I would like to approach Caroline now, because North Rhine-Westphalia had a bit of a similar experience. I mean, there was the bark beetle was the heaviest damage, but before, the forest was already vulnerable through storm and drought damage. And yeah, looking at those diverse forest disturbances that I've just mentioned, that North Rhine-Westphalia in Germany has been facing over the past years, I would like to know, how did you support the restoration or / recovery efforts? How have forest owners been supported after the disturbances? And how do you ensure that restoration considers different forest functions and ecosystem service? I mean, the economic side has already been mentioned. What I would like to also add, because it hasn't been mentioned now, we've been talking about planting all the time. I also wonder about natural regeneration. But Caroline, you have plenty of experience, so maybe you would like to elaborate.
Sure. I hope you can hear me. Yeah, I work in North Rhine-Westphalia in Germany. It's a state with the highest private forest ownership in the whole country. 63% of the forest is privately owned. So in our state, the dominating tree species was Norway spruce, actually, for a long time. We had about 30% of Norway spruce in the forest cover in North Rhine-Westphalia. So our forest owners really relied on this species in pure stands to generate income. It was not mostly not mixed, but pure. And we also have lots of sawmills who were specialized on this species. But from 2018 onwards, we had really lots of disturbances. At first came a big storm in January of 2018, Friederike, which caused major wind throw and also structural damage to our spruce forests. And then in the same year, in summer, we had an extreme drought. So the spruce was already stressed and was now under water stress, so was declining in vitality and was getting more and more vulnerable. It couldn't defend itself. For example, by building resin, it wasn't building anything anymore. It was defenseless, basically. So the bark beetle could attack, and we had really lots of bark beetle outbreaks, and like 3 or 4 generations in 1 year. So our spruce was declining rapidly over the next few years until 2022. We had renewed drought and heat wave, and approximately 133 hectares of forest is damaged. So of course, we had to intensify as a research center of our yeah, we had to intensify our research. We had to help our forest owners. What can they do to reforest their big damaged sites? Fortunately, we already had a forestry silvicultural concept, which came out in 2018. So now we tried to make a new concept. It was called, or is called, the reforestation concept for North Rhine-Westphalia. And in our research team, we really try to apply our research we do to practical help and translate the findings to guidance for our forest owners so they can actually make informed decisions. So this was the most important thing that we did this concept. We also did a smaller concept on standing dead wood, which was a really big issue. People were asking us, what are we going to do with the standing dead trees? Are we going to leave them, or do we have to remove everything? And the answer is never easy. It depends. So we had our reforestation concept, which basically means we want to promote mixed species forests from 4 or more species. And of course, we focus on site, so soil and climate on site, so the trees can be adapted really well. We call this forest development types. They are some kind of standardized silvicultural models, and each type defines like a target forest structure and species mix. The species, of course, should be suitable with one another, and also to the site conditions and to the management goals that we have. We have different forest development types also depending on if you have a focus more on biodiversity or if you focus more like on economics, for example. And we don't only write concepts and tell the forest owners, okay, read this. We also provide direct services. Of course, we advise, we do on-site consultation, and we organize seminars and workshops to reach as many people as possible with our knowledge. And we also made online courses, so-called massive open online courses, MOOC. So they can basically watch videos and are already prepared for when we meet in the forest with a bit of knowledge. So now I want to show an example from Superb. Let me see if I can share the slide. Can you see it?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Okay, so this is from Project Superb, but we're trying to apply this in whole of North Rhine-Westphalia, of course, step by step. As you can see, we have really diverse areas and diverse planting. On the left, you can see the actual demo sites, and on the right, you can see the forest site map, so the soil map, basically. And it goes from a very dry to moderately dry and fresh to moist or wet. And we really try to adapt the tree species we plant to the soil conditions. So it's a pretty colorful map. And this is pretty detailed approach, but we don't plant a singular mix, but we try to have bigger plots. So the mixture basically stays and we don't lose single tree species from this. So this is just an example how we go about the reforestation. Another pretty important tool we use, I will share another slide, is Waldinfo. It means Forest Info North Rhine-Westphalia. This is an open access and digital platform, and it helps our forest owners to plan their own restorations. What's really the most important feature, I think, and you can see it here, I try to translate the most important scenarios. You can choose your own site, your own location property, and receive guidance tailored to your location. So, for example, here we have the pedunculate oak, and you can see, will it be suitable here in your area or not? The green is obviously suitable, the yellow is so-so, bit dangerous, and the red is not suitable. And also you can choose from 3 climate scenarios, and this is the current climate and the RCP 4.5 and RCP 8.5 scenario, which is basically the worst case. So I chose for this the middle scenario, the moderate climate change, and because this is a screenshot, I cannot show you what would happen if I click 8.5, but I think you can imagine that the red parts will be bigger in that case. This is something we're kind of proud of, that we managed to do this, because it really helps our forest owners to make informed decisions. Of course, we still help them also with our foresters on site and are there for them. It's often very important to have a one-on-one talk, not only look on websites, but still this is a very important tool. Also, we help the owners, of course, to navigate subsidy programs like reforestation funding or fencing and site preparation. There are different fundings depending on what the ministry gives out this year. So you asked also how we are ensuring ecosystem services and forest functions. We are trying to implement this into our recommendations. We are not only focusing, for example, on timber production, but these forest development types should also include, for example, they are already very diverse with 4 or more tree species, and they also include different biodiversity functions. We look at water regulation. This is a part we are trying to implement even more in the future, because it's very important to keep water in the forest. And also we look a bit, because we are very highly populated, at recreational value of the forest. This is also in some parts very important. So you can also invite Info NRW, see the different forest functions. You can click on these layers and look at forest ecology, for example, management, or different other functions. I think the most important thing is that we try to get mixed and climate stable stands, and that we don't focus anymore so much on timber production, but more on vitality of the species and of the whole forest.
Thank you very much, Caroline. And I think it's pretty amazing what North Rhine-Westphalia has set up here, this Waldinfo NRW tool, where you can also look into the different forest functions, ecology, etc. Also, of course, the kind of tree species selection support, I think is something that also people like Noel need now. And I'm happy to say, and I will share the link in the chat, that in Superb, a tree species and provenance selection tool has been developed. It's called Seed for Forests, and it also includes the different climate scenarios. So for those people who want to adapt their forest now, want to recover their forest after disturbances, who want to foster both planting and natural regeneration, this is something that we can highly recommend, and it's based on models and a lot of science. So I will share the link in the chat. I asked a question on the natural regeneration, but I would like to, because I've heard from Christoph that he's in a thunderstorm. So I just want to make sure I also still hear from Christoph. Actually, my next question would have been to Joe, but I will now take Christoph first, if that's okay with you, Joe, to make sure he can speak. Because I can see the connection is getting bad, so I hope we can still hear him or get him back. So my question to Christoph would be the question on the resilience of the forest and how we can make the forest more resilient to climate change and disturbances. What role does biodiversity play? What role does natural regeneration play? And what can science do to support the kind of transformation that we need?
Thank you. So yes, if I am interrupted or if you hear strange noise, it's not my house, is just outside. It's quite windy, rainy, and stormy. Yes, many points and many ways to address your point. The first one perhaps is on the trend analysis and the risk analysis. I think that when you look in details, you can learn a lot about the vulnerability of sites, and you can learn a lot about how to make some fine-tuning in managing your forest. In UK, you know, for example, they have a dam system to address the wind exposure. And then if you combine that with the height of the trees, the soil, and some microtopographic information, you can decide to reduce your rotation length, or you can decide to interrupt, to have no thinnings. You can adapt a lot your silviculture. And I think this is something that we need to address more at the management unit level. It's more difficult to address it at a large scale. For example, when I heard people saying we will have more storms. When you look in the track of record in Ireland, you had storms already recorded in the century before. You had already 200 kilometers per hour. So this main trend is not so easy to address because of statistical series and so on. So I think working with business as usual for storm is not stupid, but perhaps it's more stupid when we deal with other risks like a fire or like insect and pathogen, when we see the rate of introduction of new species and new pathogen in Europe. This was one point. It was about better know the risk and improve the fine-tuning, the fine assessment of your risk. You have other points you can play around. For example, with storm, is the water table and the drain. In many cases, you know how much rain you will get, and sometimes you can anticipate also and make a better water management. And of course, then you have, as I said before, you have the height of the trees and the rotation length. When we go to the topic of continuous cover and natural regeneration and what kind of management to do, it's true that for storm you can get benefit of irregular structures because the wind inside the stand is supposed to be lower. But with species like Sitka, with limited self-pruning, the gain is not always that high. So if you are at the edge of the collapse of the trees, it can make the difference. But then you can also end up in a situation where you're testing much more complicated than when you have some mosaic of trees and small patches. So there is pro and con as usual. But yes, it is something that can help. Then there is also some landscape planning that can be done. If you consider that the broadleaves, for example, don't have leaves on winters, then perhaps you can put them in some places that are more exposed somehow on winter, and perhaps you can sacrifice that on the productivity of your site. And we have seen in the example of this Irish property where there is a mosaic of stand already in place. So this is something you can already address a lot. Coming back on preparedness also, there is one point that was not discussed so far, is about the storage. Basically, when you know that you will have quite often storm damages, it's good to anticipate storage solutions. For example, we try to keep the 2010 storage zone active in some part of France, because when you have more than 1 year of trees affected, 1 year of harvesting volume affected, you have two choices. Either you increase the capacity of processing the wood in your area. So I heard you will increase it of 30% in Ireland. Either you export it more, so you could export the 30% again, and then you could also store 30% of the trees, and then these trees could be kept For two, we have learned that we can keep trees quite long. Even with blue stem, you can have good technical properties, and so this is part of the preparedness. And one point was about insurance also. We have insurance in our group here. And as you know, in planted forest, you have quite a big asset. You're always interested in securing your asset. And the conclusion when we talk with economists making a careful assessment, which is not always the case of forest owner, because you are more affected when you are an owner, but they say that the more relevant in our area will be, for example, to ensure the young stand against fire, because this is when they are more prone to damages, and ensure the old stand to storm, because this is when you will lose more. And so you see, there is some strategies that can be developed, and there you have reinsurance in UK, and we have insurance in France, and there is no reason for not having some in Ireland. Okay, I don't want to jeopardize too much time, but these are some of the key messages I wanted to share. It was a bit messy. I'm not sure I addressed all the points you wanted me to address, Gesh, but it was in reaction to all the points raised before.
That was very much appreciated. And this way you also made sure, in case the connection stops, you made a point on a lot of the questions that have been asked also by Noel already, and that have partly been addressed by Fergus as well. But you also, of course, want to learn from the others. So you have some examples from France now, some examples from Germany. I would like to kind of ask to invite Jo now to share a bit of her kind of strategic bird's eye perspectives, because you've worked in different functions for policymakers, but you've also worked with forest owners. You've been in North Rhine-Westphalia actually with colleagues from Ireland. So what do you think from your perspective? What does policymaking need to do? What do forest owners need? And what kind of support systems do we need in the future for the restoration of post-disturbance scenarios, because we will have more disturbances? So what are your thoughts on this? A lot has been discussed, and I know you can kind of probably comment on everything. So a few points from your side would be really interesting.
Thanks, Geisha. Yeah, and gosh, yeah, we looked across the Irish Sea at what was going on with horror with that storm when it hit you. I think it was this idea of a sting jet coming in and hitting you, and it got to Ireland before it got to Galloway here. So that was, yeah, it was really shocking seeing that. And we were just recovering from Arwen. We had Storm Arwen 2 years previously, which had hit us, and that was a northeasterly storm. So, you know, my experience is I take Christoph's point about wind has always been with us. I mean, all of my career, we've been managing for wind in these kind of Atlantic climates, those of us that live in those kind of climates. But the uncertainty, how they behave and how they're going to behave in the future, we're dealing with more uncertainty, I think, in terms of that. And I think we also have to split between endemic wind blow, which is relatively predictable, and we can do management, and we have been doing management techniques for, like dams, which Christoph said. And then you've got the catastrophic wind blow, these one-off events. I mean, I was talking to a climate specialist in Ireland yesterday, actually, and he was saying, yeah, this sting jet event, that wasn't in any model. What the wind did there, that wasn't in any model, in any climate model, that behavior. So this is the kind of the resilience piece, which is about unpredictable events. So I think we need to remember the two. But to get back to the question, number one, in my experience, is you want to try and keep politics out of this as much as possible as a policymaker. So the job as a policymaker is to try and stop things getting political. We experienced this when Clara hit in the UK back in 2012. Country was totally unprepared for it. Politicians were unprepared for it. It was front page news for weeks, if not months, and it took up so much resource, which would have been better dealing with the actual issue rather than dealing with the politics and the kind of the inflamed debate that was going on. So I'd say my number one thing that policymakers need to do is stop this becoming a political issue when the crisis actually hits. The best way to do that is to be prepared. And policymakers do this all the time. We do risk assessments for everything all the time. And gosh, we've learned so much with COVID. So treat this as a part of your normal risk planning. This isn't peculiar to forestry. Risk management in governments, risk management in policy is done everywhere. But for some reason, in my experience, quite often forestry is over here and thinks it's special. And then meanwhile, the rest of government is dealing with other kind of risks that it's having to deal with. We need to integrate this so that it's just seen as another form of risk that then needs to have contingency planning around it and be incorporated into the government risk frameworks. That then means politicians know there's a risk that something might be happening. They've already started to get their heads around the issues, and so that it's shared. So I think that's kind of to try and stop it becoming political, get things in place to stop it becoming political. Best way to do that is build it into your government's risk framework already, because this is at that level in terms of the scale of impact that it can have. And start to build contingency plans, because that reassures people, that gets them thinking about the issues before they have to react when all the adrenaline's flowing. Then the other point, and some of my experience in Ireland and in Scotland, is about so often in policy, we end up designing regulations that are designed to stop things happening, which is fine in some circumstances, until you're in a crisis, when what you need is to enable things to happen. You need to help people to get on with things, help them to respond. And so one of the things that we did in Scotland, for example, was we redid all of our forestry legislation back in 2018. And we thought very, very hard about what went into primary legislation. So in our legal system, that's the stuff that has to go through Parliament, and takes quite a long time and needs parliamentary time to assess it. What went into secondary legislation. And we put as much as possible into secondary legislation because it's much nimbler and it's much faster. And we shrank what we put in primary, increased what we put in secondary. To do that, we had quite a lot of difficult conversations with stakeholders, because stakeholders, particularly environmental NGOs, like to have things in primary legislation because they think it's safer. And if you're protecting things, put it in primary. But that can really give you a problem when you're dealing in a crisis. So that would be my next advice to policymakers, is think about your regulation in the context, not just of protecting stuff, but also enabling the recovery to happen. So my third point is, and you were hearing this from Carolyn and Fergus, use experts. Make sure you've got networks with experts before the crisis hits, and then communicate, because any kind of vacuum will get filled by less helpful people, and then again you get into the political situation. So use experts and use communicate. Always, even if you've got nothing to say that you've got nothing to say, and give a platform to experts. Again, we learn all of this through COVID. There's huge lessons to learn there. And then my last point on that in terms of using experts is, remember your state forest services. They've got all sorts of experts and expertise. Those relationships can help policymakers who are generally, and I mean, not in your case, Fergus, but I know in a lot of administrations, they're generalists. They don't know a huge amount about forestry. But if you've got those networks already there, you can have those conversations in a safe space with technical experts who are already there in government agencies. And, those partnerships need to be really tight, and that can just pay massive dividends. And, I've experienced that massively in my career. So that's kind of my summary for sort of the policymakers, is try and keep politics out of it as much as possible. Prepare, treat it as part of risk management, get your contingency plans in there, communicate 10 times more than you think you need to, and make sure you use experts.
Thank you very much, Jo. There's a direct response from Christoph, and that's exactly how I would like the panel to be. Be dynamic, just answer or ask a question, follow up. We still have a bit of time. And I also will address 2 or 3 questions from the chat still. But yes, go ahead, please, Christoph.
Yeah, just to react to the contingency plan. It looks ridiculous, but there is one important thing that is always happening with storm. is that we lose memory. People who have experienced the previous storm just have gone, they're retired or whatever. So when the second one is arriving, if you don't have a plan, just reminding all the steps you forwarded, all the mistakes you have done and so on, you are just losing this memory. It just for that is useful. You don't need to make something brilliant. You just need to record what you have done good. The second point about strategical issue related to good governance is usually you have the prices collapsing. And so you have many strategies to maintain the prices. Either you let them collapse, either you can force to have a minimum prices, and then it will have an influence of the grant and the reconstitution cost. So this has to be anticipated also somehow. What is the strategy from the government point of view? And then there is another point that can have a long-term impact on the sector is the recommendation for reconstitution. If you recommend to have half of another species, it means that you will change the wood products you will be able to produce. You will change the size of the log, you will change the type of product. If we shorten the rotation, you maybe have more industrial wood. If you go for broadleaf, you may have long rotation with different markets. So any decision you are taking at the reconstitution time when you are starting to influence massive areas will have an influence on the market. It's not because the species is not here that it has no future. For example, when our grandfather planted Douglas fir, there was no market for Douglas fir. And now in France, it's the main market. But then it has to be anticipated and to be considered properly.
Yeah, thank you very much, Christoph, also for mentioning the wood value chain, which was also in one of the questions from Noel, the kind of markets for diverse species. And that's a big problem because there are usually in many countries, and it was the same in Germany, markets for conifer species. For spruce is like the best seller. And now, of course, also the markets have to change. And that is something that is that's something we've been addressing in another project where we've been working with Jonathan as well, Resonate. I've shared some recommendations from our policy briefs in the chat. So I highly recommend you to check them out. And the markets do play a big role here. But I will, of course, prefer to let the experts speak. I'm not sure if Joe or Fergus have raised their hands before.
I think Joe.
Let Fergus go first.
Okay, Fergus go first.
No, Joe was first. Joe was first, I think, yeah.
All I was going to respond to on what Christoph said was we absolutely saw this, not just with the trees that you're going to reconstitute with, but when larch got hit with the Phytophthora, and it was a really good example actually of where the State Forest Service and the policymakers and the private sector all got together to optimize the marketing of larch and were able to persuade sawmills to take larch, maybe for products that they previously would have been looking for spruce for, but it was done as a coordinated effort. And then the role of the policymaker was to bring that collaboration together because they already had the networks, and then we could get the larch away, which meant we could get the sites cleared, which slowed down the spread. So yeah, really good example, Christoph.
Yeah, thank you very much, Joe. And it's good to hear that there are some examples out there already, because in the case of Germany, this is being addressed now, but it was really difficult after the bark beetle hit. So a lot of wood was then also exported to for instance, China, which was lost for Europe then in a way. But of course, also forest owners had to make some revenue. Fergus, please go ahead.
Just to follow up from Christoph and Joe's point there about kind of that memory about how you sort of remember from previous storms. And I think that's a really important point. And I know from Storm Darwin, we had a lot of expertise built up in the Quilcha Forest, Quilcha and the Forest Service in relation to how you actually identify and sort of estimate damage in particular windblown stands. So I think it's a really important point. And again, even to document what you've done from previous storms. And I know we documented, we published various scientific papers on how we calculated the forest blown damage resulting in Storm Darwin in 2014, which blew down 8,000 hectares. So again, you know, building on that expertise, and we still have that expertise expertise in those particular organizations. I think it's a really important point that there are large numbers of people working in different organizations, not just the state ministry, and we need to leverage those as much as possible. Regarding the regulation, yeah, that's a really tricky one, because you're trying to regulate the harvesting of timber in a positive way to try and prevent environmental damage, because obviously when you've got 12 million cubic meters of timber on the ground, it all has to be harvested. And again, there's potential for environmental damage there, even though the forests are already windblown. And I think you're right, Joe, it's getting that sort of agile legislation, but you know, with legislation, it's not that agile to change it. And again, it's a work in progress. And certainly I think those points are well made. And when we look at the regulatory regimes right across Europe, there's different regulatory regimes. We're in the European Union, there's things we have to do, but certainly there are possibly ways that we do things a lot better. And I think that communication piece, I think, is important. And maybe we need to reach out more to other member states to see what effective ways we can do in relation to the management and regulation of timber.
Thank you very much, Fergus. Speaking of collaboration, there is a comment in the chat which is coming from Tom Locatelli. He's also working in Superb and leading the Scottish Superb demo, and he's introducing stand management and scenario. He's introducing several actually stand management and scenario tools, and also decision support tools for wind risk. And he has put the examples in the chat. That was developed by UK Forest Research and also together with Christophe. And he says that these tools can actually be used also in different countries and also for different silvicultural types, and can make use of very different data inputs like forest inventory and also remote sensing data. He said that Forest Research has already discussed this with Irish colleagues, he asked the panel to elaborate or to comment on the merits and challenges of promoting cross-country collaboration and also knowledge exchange to build more resilient forests. And maybe there's also something where Jonathan can come in, or also maybe Fergus or Joe. Yeah. Who wants to start?
I mean, I could say basically the Forest Risk Facility, I think, is an excellent starting point. And I think that's where, I suppose, even for ourselves, I mean, obviously wind is the major impact of the month. But I mean, we know there's pests and diseases on the way, there's fire on the way, there's drought. So I think even as a starting point, having those national focal points in the various member states and across Europe, and having those experts that you can rely on. I mean, say we discussion with Christophe Hartbrot from Germany, lots of really good, insightful sort of advice he's given to some of our stakeholders. But, you know, there's lots of advice out there that we need to leverage. And even ourselves with a forest cover of 11-12%, you know, we're a very low forest cover, so we don't have as many experts maybe as some of the other countries with large experiences that we could draw on. So I think the platform itself, it'll only be successful if people engage with it and experts engage with it and put their expertise on that platform for others to share. But certainly I think that's a really good starting point, the Forest Risk Facility supported by Forest Europe.
I'm super happy to hear that the Forest Risk Facility is already so useful, although it has just started. But of course, there were a lot of projects that supported kind of the setup of the facility, and EFI is actually the secretariat. So I'm really happy that my colleagues have already been so much help, and there's all this cross-country collaboration really works out. Yeah, the next comment is from Joe, and then I would still like to pick up some questions from the chat that go to Noel, and also somehow link to what can be done now. Okay, Joe, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. And this is a link to Jonathan, really, and a shout out to Chogos for the work that they do in Ireland and the importance of forestry extension services. They often get missed and forgotten about, and the gulf potentially between owners and some of the science that's coming out is, you know, that's really challenging. And I've seen the loss of forestry extension services results in poorer forests and less resilient forests. So it's not just you in Teagasc, but I have seen the work that you do in Ireland. I think it's really good. And I know some countries, it's the bit that gets lost really, because they're like middlemen. So maybe Jonathan, might be worth you saying something just about the role of extension in all of this.
Yes, not just because I'm part of a forest extension, but I totally agree. I mean, this is a conversation that comes up in every project. I mean, we come to the same conclusion. Once we agree or figure out what we need to do, then the next step is to communicate this to the stakeholders, but it seems to be a vacuum. You just the gap to breach, and it's a whole different job in itself to translate ideas into messages that they're user friendly for the target audience. So it's quite, and you know very well, Geshe, what that takes. So extension agencies are a critical part of their communication and our management of European forests, but sadly is a piece that is lacking. I'm just back from Switzerland, and I was well impressed with the agency and the structures they've put in place. They're well aware of the need to translate research findings into digestible messages and how to engage with forest owners in particular. So I totally agree with you. And it's often missed, this piece is often missed. So it's something we probably collectively need to focus more on and allocate more resources. But if I might make a comment generally, I'm delighted we're talking about markets, because I think they're another missing piece in adapting to climate change. I think as Christoph mentioned, the silviculture we can be quite good at adjusting a silviculture and species. But then, as Caroline said, you're moving from timber production to vitality, which I totally agree. But to a forest owner, that's a massive risk. So markets needs to move with the forest, whether at the moment the forest moves with the market. So we need to kind of move together. I think that Christoph might want to come in.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, it's a short comment on the importance of advisory group. There is a project called FoRISK that gather all the advisory group of Europe, most of them at least. And one of the main topic that came up is to share good practices and tools on risk management, including species selection for adaptation, evaluation of potential risk. And when we make a survey, we did a survey with the FI about the main expectations from forest owner regarding, for example, tree breeding. They don't care about having trees growing faster or bigger anymore. What they want is to have two trees that can survive all kinds of hazards that will come ahead, biotic or abiotic risks. So I think there is we will not have too much expertise, and we will really need to cooperate as much as possible.
Thank you very much, Christoph. And I actually wanted to ask Caroline to come in here, so you raised your hand at the perfect time.
Yeah, perfect. I mean, I wanted to comment on what Noel said about focusing on vitality, which is, of course, in some way a risk, but in other way, we try to mitigate the risk doing that, because, and also with mixing species, because it's also a big risk to focus, for example, on one really economically strong species, which we have done a lot in North Rhine-Westphalia, and for some reason it always somehow worked. And we have this saying, which is just one time spruce, we can still plant spruce because it will work. And even if there's a storm, it will be an economically valuable storm. But now we realized over 3 years, 4 years, we had this drought and bark beetle infestation, and we just couldn't compensate this anymore. So it would have been better, of course, we learn from our mistakes. It would have been better to focus on different species, and right now under climate change, on vitality, to keep the forest. We don't want to have steppe or anything. We want to have the forest. So this is our main focus. I just wanted to explain why I mentioned that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Caroline. And I think a crucial question is then also to for the markets to adapt and to be aware. And that's also something we've been addressing in Resonate, the value chain resilience. And the value chain is not there yet. They are not aware. And so far, they have been kind of dictating the market in terms of these are the species that we accept, you know, these are the species that we're using, including also the sawmills, of course. But there has to be a push towards also the value chain. I have some questions still in the chat that link to forest resilience. And I would like to ask you those questions, Noel, because I think they're important also for the kind of future for the future of your forest. One question is related to the soil. How much do you, it comes from Stephanie Schmidt, who's working for DG Climate. What is the role of the soil in your planning and consideration? And it's also something that Caroline has been mentioning, the importance of the soil. The other question relates to the thinning. If you're harvesting all the trees in your continuous cover forestry plan, and how you want to approach this in the future. So some more specific questions to you, which also I think link to forest resilience. That's why I think it makes sense to ask them in the end. Coming back to you.
I don't quite get the question on the soil type. All we would have done in the initial planting was broadleaves that were the more fertility demanding species were on the better ground, and Sitka and the hybrid larch were on the poorer ground, and that's and the other part of the planting plan was really about the field patterns and the roadways through that. That was our initial planting plan. The other part of the thing about the thinning in the kind of the CCF area, all we have done so far is we have done what we call a first thinning to 25–30% of the stems where we will establish the racks through it and that. And the second phase of that then, which is imminent but not particularly planned yet, is tree selection and take out the weakest, and that'll be the next phase of it. Then there are other interventions after that. That's where we're at the minute. The long-term plan, as far as my understanding of continuous cover is, as the name suggests, there will be no clear felling of it or replanting. It's continuous by definition. So it's beyond
That's clear.
Selective extractions and trying to probably leave the better trees there, and they become eventually the seed source for the future. And that's as much as I know about what we're at so far.
If I could just add, the question, I suppose we were talking about it, will the system be more resilient in the long run? So that's the expectation.
Hopefully, yeah. I have no idea.
Well, that's definitely what we learn from the Resonate project with the mixed species and the different age classes and so the selective thinning, that these are all factors that add to the forest resilience. So you are on a good path, but you can, of course, still be hit by disturbances, because those will be a topic, our topic now, and will be a topic in the future. To kind of summarize, I mean, we've been addressing a lot of issues, from how to respond to disturbances, to this particular disturbance, but also to disturbances in general, the role of collaboration with science and experts from practice, to also the role of policymaking and what policymakers can do to be better prepared and more reactive or faster in their reaction. And I think there's a lot that is still being learned. Are there any kind of final comments that you would like to share, any thing or any question that is still open from your side, Noel, that can be answered by this panel or could be answered by this panel?
If we go with Andrew in the end, that's the big question.
Well, that is obviously, we say, what do I replant with? But
It's probably a webinar in itself.
we just have to do more research, I think, and read more articles. I still don't know. As I say, it's a big question, and the science is in the West, as Joe said, in Ireland and Britain, we have the Atlantic influence. The Atlantic is getting warmer, so we are going to get more energetic storms. So we have to have some more resilient woods. It seems as sure as night follows day that that's the way we have to go. But then we'll say I would have found Norway spruce was more wind firm, but sure the European experiences that kind of falls over as well. So maybe it is just more continuous cover management and mixed age forests. Maybe that is the way I should go. It's the one thing about one of the pluses of my experiencing is that in spite of myself, when I have the ash replaced and the Sitka replaced, I'm on the first step of a mixed stage forest anyway. This is just going to happen in spite of me almost. So it's just one of these surprises along the way. But yeah, we'll see how it goes. We're still alive.
Yeah, that is the most important. But I can definitely recommend you the seed and tree species selection tool that I've shared in the chat. I can also share it again via email because it does consider different climate scenarios, and it considers the soil and other factors. So that's definitely something to look into. Probably also Caroline can share some of their experiences in North Rhine-Westphalia, particularly when it comes to the trees that are vulnerable now in your forest, and potential other disturbances that can affect them, like the fires, because the risk of fire and the risk of the bark beetle or other pathogens is higher after a disturbance. So the kind of interactions between disturbances is also something that has to be considered, of course. And then finally, my question, there's another question from a forest disturbances expert in the chat that I will still also ask, but I have still the question related to, because you were thinking about replanting, what role does natural regeneration play in your plan? And is this something you're considering? Because there's also research that shows that natural regeneration actually increases the resilience of the forest. So what are your thoughts on that?
When I walk through it now, it's funny. Some species already you can see seedlings coming through. More won't. We're probably ever so slightly too young that we're not a productive seed bank yet. Maybe if it was maybe 6 or 7 years older, then we would have all the different species there putting on cones and generating seed. But in the open spaces and that, there are larcher appearing all over the place. Alder is self-seeding and the oaks are self-seeding. So there is a bit of it, but it's early days. Just as I say, I think my plantation is ever so slightly young. But it'll be watch this space, I suppose, will be what we'll say about it.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to still ask a question that is, I think, to a lot of people on the panel. Actually, it's coming from Marco Pataccia from Wageningen University and Research, and he wrote this paper on the forest disturbances across Europe in the past several hundred years. So he really worked on this topic in depth, and he is asking, because he's also a modeler, do you think that technological advances like engineered wood can enhance the utilization of hardwood? And if yes, how can policymakers stimulate the value chain to adapt processing lines? And has this sort of policy intervention the potential to align forest owners' risk reduction improving ecological resilience and value chain demands in the panel in general, and then what is the opinion of the panel on this topic? Any direct responses? Jo, please go ahead.
Yeah, so two things on that. One is, yes, I think there's huge potential with engineered woods, and we are investing. I know in Scotland and the UK there is work to invest in this, and part of that is to drive more diversity in the forest, but also to recover more value from the existing forest. The question of broadleaves, though, is also about rotation lengths. It's not just about the properties of the wood. And for us in Ireland and in the UK, the rotation lengths are still so much longer for hardwood than they are for native species than they are for non-natives. The impact that has on the economy for owners is still, the gap is still too wide. So I think, yes, for getting existing native species into management could be helpful. But if I was in John and Noel's position, I'd be looking at it and saying, I've got to wait 100 years for or maybe 60 years for my hardwoods and 30 years for my softwoods. And even if you got a premium for your hardwoods, it's very hard to make those numbers stack up. So that would be an observation on that.
Thanks, Christoph.
Yes, when we think about hardwood, usually we have in mind oaks, you know. From a French perspective, when you think about oaks, pedunculate oaks or the steel oak, they are the most threatened species with climate change. It is most likely that most of the oak France will die, and they represent 65% of the landscape. So, and if you have a rotation of 120 years, the climate forecast in 120 years are not so fine for this species. So then you have other broadleaves, like eucalyptus and many exotic species that can cope with future climate. But interestingly, we are not willing to dig too much in this. And then we have broadleaf more Mediterranean, like cork oak, and then you will not be able, even with the engineered wood product, really to make furniture, and you will go to different uses. And as I was saying before, it will be a different chain of custody behind this species. So yes, I would say the diversity of silviculture, the diversity of choices is the best way to be resilient. Not everybody doing the same thing, but I'm not sure there is one solution, and that hardwood as such is the solution. It will be part of the solution.
Thanks. Fergus.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a very good question. I mean, obviously broadleaves in Ireland, they're quite small at the moment, and certainly, you know, I think we have to look at this at a landscape level. You know, we need lots of different types of tree species in our landscape. If you look at our afforestation program that we're doing at the moment, about 50% of that program is broadleaf forests. So we're getting a very increased level of diversity. But again, the bread and butter species that drives the economic sustainability of our forest woodlands is basically commercial softwoods. And again, Sitka spruce and Norway spruce and Douglas fir, that's what's driving, I suppose, the economic return for our farmers to make them willing to actually put their land into forestry in the first place. So I think, yeah, it's a very difficult balance to get. But again, with the innovation in harvested wood products and the innovation in CLT and other species, what we're seeing now is that you can do lots of different things with wood fiber that you couldn't do in the past. So I think the future is bright for using some of those minor species into the future. And again, I suppose that's where the research and innovation comes in. But at the moment, it is driven by conifers and commercial softwoods. But there's no reason to suggest that in the future there are potential there to use broadleaves in a different way than was used in the past. But certainly there are challenges there, and I think, you know, that's where, you know, we've got that Wood Pops platform that's being developed as well across Europe, trying to bring across expertise in research and innovation. And I know in Ireland we've set up a timber and construction task force as well, steering group looking at a whole range of different things to try and increase the level of homegrown timber in Ireland, you know, to be increasing the, I suppose, sustainability and provide income to forest owners to drive that sustainable forest management that Noel talks about, you know. So as a mix and a landscape level, as Christoph says, you know, there's people who want to plant broadleaves, you know, There'll be others who want to grow timber for climate and for sequestration and for carbon and for timber benefits, you know. So we've got a multiplicity of different forest owners with different objectives. And if we can try and balance them all together, I think we could have a very resilient forest landscape in the future.
Thanks, Fergus. Before I give the final word to Jonathan and Noel, I have yet another question in the chat, which is very specific. So I was really struggling with it and therefore also hesitant to read it out because but it's a question from, I guess, an Irish participant. So I still want to get and respond to this. Ah, there I go. Okay. The question is from Joe Govern. And it's about the climate resilient reforestation scheme that he says has a cap of 200 hectares per annum in funding. And he says that 97 hectares approved, so have been approved so far this year. And then he's asking when the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine in Ireland will lift the cap and encourage those with storm damage to have this option freely available to them.
Yeah, I mean, certainly Joe's right. That was a pilot scheme introduced in our forestry program. And it's great to see that we have 97 hectares already approved and farmers interested in taking up that scheme. So that's a positive. We're also involved in a midterm review now to look at our schemes to see what's worked and what needs to happen. So certainly I think there's a fantastic scope there to lift that cap and to look at increasing the level of funding for that particular measure. But again, we have state aid rules and we have finance to interact with, but certainly, you know, we've got lots of opportunities there for the windblown areas, as Joe describes there, that there's potential for us to lift that cap and to look at the results of the pilot scheme that's been now in operation for the last number of years.
Yeah, thank you very much, Fergus. And I'm happy that Joe is also happy now. Jonathan and Noel, you still wanted to comment, and then I will wrap it up.
Yeah, just a quick comment, and Fergus covered much of what I wanted to say, really, but I just don't think there is a matter of spruce versus broadleaves. We can have both in different contexts, and also, yes, timber to engineer timber, I think is the future. We don't just have slow-growing broadleaves, but fast-growing broadleaves, and I think with the right silviculture, the differential in terms of productivity between spruce and fast-growing broadleaves isn't so great as we might believe. And one thing we haven't mentioned at all to help transition to new markets and new systems, payment for ecosystem services, I think they're an important part of the solution. So is the income to owners doesn't have to come just for producing timber, but you know, we already have some schemes in Ireland that have introduced that element. I think they're an important piece in adapting and changing our systems. And we just haven't mentioned it yet. So I'll leave it to that.
Thank you very much. Usually the forest restoration talks are an hour and a half, but we have this big and very qualified panel, so I extended it a little bit. But now I want to wrap it up. It was a really interesting panel discussion. I already mentioned some of the points that we discussed today, so I don't need to do that again. There is a lot of collaboration needed that has become clear also between research and practitioners, and also guidance from research to policymakers, and also support from the policy side for the restoration and adaptation measures that forest owners in Ireland will have to take now, but also all across Europe, because we are all dealing with different disturbances, and we will be dealing with them also in the future. And the predictability is something that Joe mentioned, and I think it's crucial that certain things are not predictable anymore. So that's why it's so important to build more resilient forests, and we have some good examples from all over Europe, and I think also Noel with his work is leading by example. So thank you for sharing your perspectives and for being a pioneer in this field. And I'm sure you've also inspired others in this call today. We will take a summer break now in July and August. and most likely in September, because the talk is actually happening at the same time as our final project meeting. We will postpone it then to mid-September. But we will most likely focus on European forest restoration modeling. So there has been a lot of modeling in the SUPERB project, and we will learn about some of the results there, results from our demos, but also some general guidance that can be drawn based on the modeling. So something to look forward to. So, until then, I wish you a wonderful summer break. Thank you very much to all the panelists today. Thank you very much to all the participants. It was a very interesting exchange also in the Q&A. And I wish you a very nice rest of the day. And if you want to recommend this talk to others, as said, we will provide it on the EFI YouTube channel next week. Thanks a lot and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
The storm is over.
Good to hear that, Christoph.